Abhi, are we good, ready to go see Michael?
Yes, sir. Let's rock and roll.
Rock and roll. Yeah. Mustang, rock and roll. One of these.
See you, sir. Meet you for the first time.
Yeah.
See you, brother.
Yeah. It's great that we love heat pumps. You love heat pumps, I love heat pumps, you love heat pumps. That's not what our job is. Our job is to deliver solutions to end users. And I find the problem that comes into play is that we put people before profits, not enough. Does that make sense? Like, we get too focused on not being willing to walk away from jobs. One of the hardest things for me to learn, and I'm good at it now, was when my boss, who you just met, Grant, he would be like, Michael, we're walking away from this job. And I'd be like, what do you mean we're walking away from this job? Like, you know, I'm not a commissioned person by any means, but it's like, I just like the validation of the ticking of the box, right? But sometimes the best thing that you can do is to walk away from a job because you're not going to provide the right solution or you're not serving that customer, right? Like if a contractor or an engineer or an end user has an experience with you where you're not delivering the solution they need, they may not know right now.
Right.
But 6 months to a year from now, when that system's not working properly, or better yet, you just put a heat pump in and they had a $200 gas bill that's now an $800 hydro bill. I'm exaggerating, but it happens. It happens. And they are looking at, well, what happened? You told me that you were going to do the best job possible.
Yeah.
So it's a big challenge sometimes. It's that it's not even the confirmation bias. It's that people that are making decisions are not making decisions like it's their parents.
Yeah, and the decisions are best made at the kitchen table, right? Between the contractor and the homeowner. Right?
Yeah.
But there's, like you were saying earlier, government programs and incentives, everything kind of just makes that conversation really stifled.
Right.
And adds more friction. And so people are chasing incentives. Contractor just has inventory because they have to go jump through hoops to get the homeowner qualified. Like, no one's happy in that transaction. No one's like solving problems.
The weird part is you can go back to the 80s. Like if you look at the early hydro programs, like I was obviously not in the trade. Actually, I was as a kid, but you know, the reality is you can go back and talk to contractors. If you sat with my dad and said like, hey, what is your idea behind rebates? Like, this is a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
Rebates are good, right? Like, I don't have a problem with incentive programs. I think incentive programs make sense.
Yeah.
And I just question, do we need different people at the table?
Right.
And that's not a knock at anybody. The other thing I see is that sometimes, and it's just in how we say things, we take an adversarial approach. What I mean by that is, let's say Ben's in charge of incentives, okay? Ben puts together an incentive program and it doesn't work very well, right? All the money ends up going to the wrong people. It doesn't really come together. A lot of the time what happens is it becomes, oh, you and I are against Ben. Like, we could have done better. Let's get Ben squeezed out. The approach needs to be, we appreciate the effort that Ben had. Who do we bring to the table now that can help take what Ben did and build upon it, right? And to me, I think with the programs, the thing that we need to figure out is who's not currently involved in this process, whether it's an association or whether it's a government organization, who's not involved in this process so that we can make it better.
So off the top of your head, if I asked you, can you think of someone who's not involved, who needs to be involved?
I think number one is you need to have people representing every section of that channel. So if you're going to put together an incentive, let's say for heat pumps, and I don't know what the process is, I've never been involved, but if you're going to put an incentive together for heat pumps, I think the challenge is you have to have every single subset of that organization involved. And what I mean by that is you want to have manufacturers involved. You want to have distributors involved, whether that's EMCO or Eden Energy or Wolseley, and you want to have contractors involved. I think you also want to have some associations involved, like CIPH, HRAI. But I think the thing that really holds it back, and I don't know the answer to this, is how do you make sure you have the people involved that are there for the right reasons? I don't know how you determine that.
We just recorded and published a podcast that we even challenged the fundamental reasoning behind incentive programs, and possibly like where we came up with the hypothesis that it's like maybe they're never actually intended to work because they're always just a political game.
So
like as a hypothesis.
no, I mean, so the thing is, what the industry needs and the timelines in which you have to build an actual, because we're talking about capacity building, right?
Yeah.
Across the entire chain, like you were saying, everyone needs just a little bit of hand holding to get them to get used to using these things.
Yeah.
Try a couple of things out. So across the value chain, there needs to, there is a appetite, I think, for just trying new things in capacity building. But those timelines and having to work with those people, like oftentimes when programs are developed, like we call it like the garbage can theory, which is like, you write an idea down on a piece of paper, you come to it and throw it, and the garbage can fills up. When governments want to introduce something, they feel the energy and appetite in the room. They'll reach into the garbage can, they'll take an idea out, and they want to get the money out, and they want to be seen as doing things. So it's like you were saying, so it's not like Ben's the bad guy. It's not like the programs are the bad guy. It's that I think like the need to articulate building capacity across the value chain hasn't really reached decision makers, because what they see is that model of where you give people money and then that'll increase demand and it'll trickle down and that sort of thing.
I think part of the challenge, because it's a tough question, because I agree with you, Ben. I think that some of the decisions that get made, they pander to people, and we can tell when we're being pandered to. Like if an election's coming and all of a sudden all the things you said you were going to do that you didn't, and you start doing them right now, it pisses me off. Right. But in the same token, if you're going to put together any kind of incentive program, let's move beyond heat pumps so it doesn't sound like I have bias. Let's say you're putting together a flooring or a building envelope. That's more relevant. We're putting together a building envelope incentive. Yeah. If you were to bring together like 10 stakeholders, right? Like let's say you got Robert Bean and Gord Cook and Andy Oetting and a bunch of other people, and you brought them together, right? And said, guys, we want to build a program that's going to help to reduce our carbon footprint, that doesn't put a financial strain on everyday Canadians. What does that look like? Mm-hmm. It doesn't take a rocket scientist within that group, especially if you had 10 people, right? Maybe it's 11 people. It doesn't take very much to realize who's there for the right reasons, because they're going to talk about their community and what they can do for their community. As soon as you hear them talking about things that are for them, that's the red flag for me, right? When I sit down in a meeting and I hear somebody, like I will do this, I will talk about situations where I do not agree that a heat pump is a solution and that gas is. And I will go through why. And when I hear other people doing that, that's how I know that person intrinsically is interested in the community, right? And I'm going to give an example. So if you're in low-income housing, and if I was to come in and say, you absolutely cannot have gas, you need to have a high-performance heat pump. Well, what does that cost? Who's paying for that? Would it be better to do a hybrid approach where we keep that gas appliance, we maybe reduce the size of that gas plant, we still put a heat pump in, but we can do that for half the cost, and we end up electrifying more homes, right? That's a pretty easy argument where people go like, how do you fight with me on that? Well, I just told you not to buy something from me, right? I said, go get a hybrid approach. I don't have anything here that's going to work with what you need. I'm giving you a solution that has nothing to do with me. And I think the challenge is that how do you put together groups that do that? So HRAI does that, CIPH does that. You're trying to do that with Better HVAC, a different way, right? There's a lot of organizations that do that, and there's a lot of really good people that do that. I just don't know how it trickles up, if that makes sense.
That's
because
exactly.
People are making decisions,
that's what we were talking about.
And I don't know how those decisions are made.
And that's like, so at the end of the podcast, the last half is talking about policy and how, like, really policy, if you look at it in other industries, like the automotive industry, how there was a lot of workers, or just rather the stakeholders in the industry had got banded together to be like, this is what we need. These are the protections that we need. This is the scaffolding that we as an industry need to be able to have resilient communities, to be able to have long-term job security.
Yeah.
And so they were able to then negotiate that over years, to the point where now, like, some of the fiscal policies in both the Canadian and US governments end up protecting automotive businesses and allow them to, I guess, have sustainable workforces that are usually pretty happy. In residential HVAC, you have a workforce that's in solitary confinement.
Right.
They're fragmented, right?
Yeah, they're all in the front lines, small businesses. They do not, like, if you're a small business in the same ecosystem of a dozen other small businesses, they're all enemies. They're not brothers in arms.
Yeah.
And so I think that because that frontline group of tens of thousands of workers that in other industries would actually be banding together and being like, this is what we need.
Right.
They have never gotten together.
But I think part of that, because I agree with you, and I'm going to counter that it's also wrong, right? And that's how you and I, that's how we've connected so well, is we don't think like that. So I think part of the challenge is that in the trades itself, I can't speak for how it is now, other than my customers' experiences, my friends' experience, right? The trades are typically a very aggressive. It's not a chill, like, hey guys, what are we doing? It's like, listen, you're getting this done, and you got 5 minutes, and then there's going to be a lot of F-bombs in between all of those words as we go along, right? So you're sort of you're raised in this outlook of aggressiveness and tension, and I think there's two things that come from that. Is number one, that's not the case anymore, right?
Yeah.
There are companies that do not do that, and I know because they're friends of mine, right? And the companies that don't do that are also the same companies that go, Ben is not my competition, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are so many good companies out there that if you collaborate together and you get this stronger voice, because at the end of the day, if, you know, Haters Plumbing and Heating, which has been in business for like 60 years, they have one voice. Well, what happens when they get you and they get Ben and they get me and they get FAR and they get TJL?
It's a cacophony, yeah.
Then you actually have a voice where you can do something. I think the challenge is that whether it's HVAC, whether it's coffee, whether it's voting, I don't feel like anybody feels like their voice is being heard.
That is, you're absolutely right. We channeled your voice on the podcast yesterday, actually, because we were talking about similar things. Because I think I use the word like political power, right? It sounds like a very complicated thing. It sounds like politics sounds like nothing you want to be involved with.
Yeah.
It's like, see, P-word, policy, politics. But I think political power is simply that I am here.
Yeah.
Like my experiences, they matter, right? And like I have certain ideas on how things need to be done, and I want to be heard. And I want you. So when you were talking about trickling up ideas, that is what I mean by political power. You don't have to show people the numbers all the time, because you can convince people with numbers. That's rational. But to say, we've lived this life for 2 or 3 generations, I know what to do to fix this.
Sure.
Listen to me, right?
So part of it, I think, is exactly that, is that I had this conversation yesterday where we were talking about a contract, right? And I was telling the people I was talking to, like, listen, I cannot help you with the development of the contract. I'm not a lawyer. But it's an HVAC. So my thing was, I can tell you the bottlenecks in HVAC of if these asks are in this contract, I'm telling you right now, it's not going to work. To your point, I think it's important that if I had the ideal, like we could form, like this is what it looks like for the next rebate or incentive program. I think the key triggers are, one, you have policy people there that understand how policies are made, but they don't dictate the tone of the meeting. The people that, are we covering the same ground you guys did? For the record, I didn't watch your podcast yet, so this is hilarious. So if you look at it, they help us massage the policy because they're the machine that gets it through. The problem is, who's giving them the advice, right? Because to me, it's the same thing of you have your opinion, you're going to share your opinion, and at the end of the day, the good people are going to be the ones to say, but let Mike say something. Let me let Ben say something. And that collaborative approach, I feel, works because then you put a program out, and when people go, well, who came up with this program? Well, he did. Well, what is his qualifications? And immediately we start, sort of trickling down. That collaborative approach of like, who can possibly argue other than they didn't show up, right? And then what happens is the next time you put a group together, which is frankly what excites me about Better HVAC and why I'm involved in trying to push that message, is that any organization, if you're not there, you're not part of the problem or the solution. But the reason people aren't there is because nothing's happening, right? You hear this statement of like the good old boys club. It's not a fair statement, but I've learned what that means. That just means there's a core group of people that control everything. And what I'm looking at is, no, forget that. If the door is slammed shut and you won't let us through that door, I'm coming through the window, right? But I'm not going to go set up my own thing because, again, you have policymakers that know how the machinations work. The thing that's interesting to me is I've joined a whole bunch of organizations in the last 2 years because talk is cheap. Everybody says they want to be positive and make a difference. I'm out here going like, watch me try to do my part, right?
Do my part, not talk my part.
Do my part, not talk my part. And I've learned 2 things. One, people want you there. And if you take the right attitude to things, which is, my belief is everybody's voice needs to be heard. And if you hear those voices, you're going to pick something up out of it. And sometimes what happens is you do have these entrenched people that don't listen, but that entrenched person has no choice but to listen when there's a whole group of people on the same message. And the other thing I see, which would have happened to me, is sometimes we dismiss people with strong voices. Because I sometimes will have like, hey, what are you doing talking to that guy? Like, that guy is garbage. He's not a good person. I'm like, hold on. How did you determine they're not a good person? Is it because they talk differently? Right? Is it because they use profanity? Like, I use profanity. I grew up on tools. It's like sailing. You have to, right? Like, sometimes it's just because Ben says it a certain way that we go, well, Ben's mad. Ben's not mad. Ben just talks like that.
But that's all surface level stuff.
Right.
But the problem is the surface level stuff can keep you out of a group, and it requires people like
Exactly it.
Mike Miller is a great testament to that. You guys make sure I introduce you to Mike Miller. He's the VP of Takeo. I love that man. Like, he is one of the first people that was like, we need Ridler here. I was like, wait a minute. You barely even know me. Why do we need you here? Because clearly you bring value. Like, he's that guy that goes, how do I bring people in? And I don't care about me.
There is not to put too fine a point to it, Michael, but something that I talked about before with you and then with Nate Adams and stuff is that like this, this like almost like self-segregation into like two different communities, right? Between like, just using some terms here, like white collar policy makers, policy shapers, and blue collar workforce.
One of us,
Yeah.
other.
So here's a good one. So where do we fit into that?
Exactly.
Because we're kind of like, I consider myself blue collar, but there's people out there be like, dude, there's nothing blue collar about you. It's like, well, hold on a second. Let's get into the weeds. Let's do some work.
Yeah. And it's people like you who I see as boundary spanners, right? You can, when you go in a room, in this room you can speak a certain way, in this room you can speak a certain way. You can translate knowledge across these two different groups. But I think what I worry is happening is that increasingly these two groups, not to say that, not to distinct just one or two, but like we're growing further apart, not just in terms of like what we do for work, but like what beer we drink, where we go hang out, what our hobbies are, what motivates us and drives us.
How do we vote?
And so I'm just like, so how do we vote is also a very deterministic thing, right? I'm talking about like even more metaphysical things, like how do we think, what do we value, and what role does family play in our decision making, like things like that. I think we're going further and further apart, and I think the industry needs, policy needs people who can bridge across these two worlds.
I think that the people that can bridge the relationships, they need to be empowered. Like the Mike Millers of the world, the people that don't want to be the leader, like when we first talked about Better HVAC, the very first thing I said to Ben is, I do not want to be seen as any kind of figurehead for anything. I just want to be a good dude to help. And we immediately were on the same page of like, yeah, no, we don't want to be involved in, that doesn't do it for me. So I think the challenge is that there's a lot of good people out there that can bridge that gap. And I think that when you sit down and when you look at it, there is only tribes, is how I would call it, is because people choose to have tribes. And sometimes there's tribes because we go, engineers and contractors don't get along. And they've always not gotten along. I have so many engineer friends that make me look so much smarter because they're around me, because I don't believe in tribalism. You may have a tribe, but guess what? I'm gonna be here knocking on the door, like, hey man, can I come in and hang out with you? But in the same token, I'm gonna come over and hang out with Ben. And it's not a tribe, I'm like, hey, come over.
So but why do people choose tribes? It's because they are conditioned into a certain value system.
Yeah.
And so there has been decades of kind of these more surface level value systems that has created this fracturing. And so what I think, instead of just enabling and empowering those people that have the charisma and the right values, it is creating a cohesive messaging framework, a cohesive positioning that is about the future. It is about the resilience. It is about community. It's about family. Like, what are the fundamental uniting principles of all of us as human beings? And it's like, well, in 10 years, I want to have I want to be in a business that is, successful.
Yeah.
I want to not having to be burned out all the time.
Yeah.
I hate this boom bust cycle. I want to have a little bit more stability. I want to be able to have time with my family. I want to have time to hang out with my friends. I want to have a positive work environment that supports me. Like, deep down, that's what we all want. And so the problem is that there are these distraction frameworks that are kind of piled on top of all of that base level human goodness that I think they have to be strategically, I guess, not deconstructed, but we need to provide this alternative where it's like, what's the new story? What's the story that actually brings us all together? That then, when you're talking about it, you say the same thing that I do, that Abhi does, that Brandy does, that Victor does, that we all say, to make sure that coming out of it, every conversation we have, people are like, oh, we're all on the same team.
Yeah, I was in Italy, and hilariously, I was 5 seconds off the airplane, and this guy in front of me, his name's Josh, and he's a good friend now. I like to make friends everywhere. He's like, dude, I know you. I was like, I feel like he follows me on LinkedIn, right? And so he's a rep, he works for Barclays Sales, awesome guy. It led to us having a lengthy conversation with about a dozen, maybe half a dozen Canadians who just all happened to be there. And they were all thinking the same. And one of the things that came up is we started talking about, this guy's kind of a downer without naming him. And they, were like, hey, this guy's a downer. He's always so negative about things. He's always chirping at people. And I said, guys, we don't engage in that. And so for me, the messaging is it's collaboration, not confrontation. And it really resonated with everybody there. And, I don't have a script or a strategy, as you know, like I don't plan much. I have a work calendar that I plan my meetings. I plan my schedule. I don't go into anything with any kind of an agenda. I've learned long ago that's not the way to do it. But when you take that collaboration, not confrontation, people will adopt to that or they'll move on. And that's what I said in this group. And the great part was I made some really good friends out of that. Being like, we don't know what it is you're selling. I'm like, I'm not selling anything. I just want everybody to take an approach. Yeah. If we go into a meeting, so we're going to CMPX, we're going to hang out, we're going to have fun. We didn't plan it. We just got on WhatsApp, like, let's hang out, let's talk, let's maybe film a little bit, right? But if we go to CMPX, and let's say some people come over that have an agenda and they're not very polite, how are they going to have a confrontation with us when we're literally saying that's not us? Right? So if somebody, for example, goes like, Ridler, I hate your talk about heat pumps, or I hate your talk about gas. Okay, cool, well, let's collaborate and talk about it. No, I just want to fight about it. Well, cool, there's nobody here to fight with, right? Like, do you want to join in our discussion?
And we can spar, like sparring is great.
Well, we all know I like that, but that's for a different place and a different time, right?
But what I'm saying is that, so healthy confrontation is good.
Yeah.
It is adversarial, like where it's like, I have to beat you, and that's the only way that I can discern value out of this situation.
100%.
Some people have that approach.
100%. And the other thing that I see will happen is people will go, I knew Ben 10 years ago, and Ben was rude to me. I'm not saying you were. I'm just picking on you because you're here, right? And I mean, I would have been that guy. 10 years ago, I was a very aggressive, like if you, for example, threw out a fact that I knew was bullshit, I'd be like, dude, that's bullshit. I wouldn't even wait for the meeting to, like, as you age and mature, you're going to evolve as a person, right? So sometimes what happens is you'll go into a meeting and you'll be like, oh, I know that guy. I met him 6 years ago and he's a dick. Or I know that woman and she's really ignorant to me. Well, hold on a second. You don't know what that condition was. You don't know what might have caused that. Yeah. And for me, one of the things I make a very conscious effort to do is, number one, if you don't like him, that's for you. I'm going to decide on my own merits who you are. And if I can do something to mend this fence, I will. If you're doing something criminal or highly unethical, I will make my own decisions. And you shouldn't judge me for that, right? In the same token, if you did something 5 years ago, you've evolved and matured as an individual, we shouldn't hold that against you. And that is a huge thing. And so sometimes when you have a meeting and you're looking at, okay, how do we build a policy? And I'm not in any policy meetings, but how do we build a policy? There might be somebody who goes, well, that guy right there, he's got an agenda or she's got an agenda. Stop. Let's talk about this. Right. And to your point, I don't love the word sparring because that sort of ensues that we're going to argue about it. Yeah. But the reality is, let's have an adult discussion about it. Right. I've had the comments say, like, Michael's so Christian. Religion has nothing to do with it. I'm not a religious guy. Yeah. What they're trying to say is that I don't go into confrontations. Yeah. Now, those who've known me for a long time, I am a type A alpha male. Like, I was out with Mark and there was a fight in Italy on the street. And Mark's like, please stay here. I am definitely, like, people get confused. Like, there is a 1,000-pound gorilla up here. But we as mature adults have to learn how to control that. Like, the fact that I'm an aggressive guy works and it benefits me, but like anything, if you're going to be a good person, you need to be inclusive of all ideas, including opinions and ideas you don't agree with, right. Because hearing Ben out on something that we may not agree with, you're definitely going to walk away with one or two things. You're like, oh, shoot, I never thought about that. Yeah. The most important thing you can do is say it out loud. The second you say it out loud, like, hey, Ben, the first 9 things, terrible. That last one, loved it.
A healthy ecosystem requires diversity.
100%.
And so if you have everybody kind of just parroting the same thing and not bringing in their unique perspectives, then you end up over time, the ecosystem starts dying because it doesn't have that balance of all of these potential futures being mixed together that can create a resilient outcome.
Right.
So, Michael, several years of people have come through this training facility, right?
Thousands of them. Proud of that.
Thousands of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you've been out there being a part of like the industry in the sector. Have you noticed like the culture of the industry changing?
Yeah.
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 How would you describe
So
it?
I think it's a twofold. I've evolved as a person.
Yeah.
I'm not the same person that I was 10 years ago. I'm not
Yeah.
the same person today that I was 1 year ago.
Right.
But it's important to say that that's not accidental.
Yeah.
Right? I intentionally wake up every day and be like, I'm going to have a good day today. It sounds corny,
No.
but the reality is I wake up every single day and go, I'm going to have a good day today. And the other thing that I consciously do is if I'm having a bad day, so if somebody treats me poorly, the way I handle that is I'm going to make sure I am extra kind that day. It's crazy, but I flew out of country. I won't say where because I don't want the whole story to come together here, but I flew out of country. I had a very negative experience. 5 seconds before I got on the airplane. Like one of the worst experiences of my professional career.
Yeah.
And I got onto that plane and went, I just need to be kind. I had a blast on that flight. I had the stewards were laughing and people around me laughing. You just have fun. And I find that when you have that attitude, it sort of evolves the industry around you. Like people around you act differently. And I don't know if that's me attracting better people, because all of the people that come through here are awesome. Just because somebody has a bubbly and outgoing personality and somebody is an introvert, they're all awesome people. They just have different personalities. But more and more, I'm seeing people that come in here, and obviously we try to set that tone of like, let's have fun. But people are coming in here and they're excited to have fun. Like, let's do some stuff. Let's blow some stuff up. Now, obviously, they're not blowing anything up, but that's the tone. They're not going in like, okay, I need a pen and a pad. I'm going to write things down. No, like we're here to have fun. And I'm definitely seeing more and more of that where people seem to be very engaged. I think social media has helped immensely. You see people like Aaron and Terrence and even Bob Baker. Like there's a whole bunch of people out there and they all have totally different perspectives, totally different views, and I love it. Mm-hmm. Like I think it's important that you can go on social media and see the good, bad, and the ugly. The only thing I would like to see would be less of the look at this, right? Yeah. Because we all have done things, right? Like I am the last one to be like, look at that, because then I got to be like, how many dumb things have I done this week, this month, this year? But I think that our industry is more obvious, right? Social media, people can see what we're doing.
Well, but also the predominant culture, like the blue collar culture has been very much of a kind of pass the trauma down, where it's like, I got hazed by my senior tech, and so I'm going to haze you. That's how it has been, I think, up until especially the Gen Z and Gen Alpha.
Yeah.
They are stopping that. Like, they're just like, nope, I'm not, either that's not going to happen in this workplace, or else I'm out.
Yeah,
like,
but the other thing that needs to happen is people in our position, because we're not the young crowd, we're not the senior crowd either, right? But the reality is that we can potentially be gatekeepers and we need to choose not to be, right? So when I came up in this industry, I went through that negative experience and I would not change it for the world. That negative experience taught me a lot, bad and good, right? I love every aspect of my HVAC trade journey. But the other side of it is that when you sort of get into the more corporate world, the white collar, there are a lot of people that will close doors. And the reason they sometimes close doors is because you don't have a good attitude about things. And I definitely, when I initially got off tools, I'll be the first to say my attitude was not good. Like if I could go back and do anything differently, I would sit young Mike Ridler down and be like, dude, don't talk to people like you've been banging tin. Because people won't want to talk to you. You sound like a moron right now. But in the same token, as I say, we're gatekeepers. One of the most conscious things that I do is that if somebody comes in and they're aggressive and they're loud and they're trying to make a point with maybe some added expletives and hand gestures, maybe in your face, don't be a gatekeeper. Be like, okay, I'm going to open the door for you. We're going to walk through that door together and I'm going to try and empower you, right? Because people did that for me. Grant did that for me. Right? I always make the joke, like, people like me now. You should have seen me before Grant mentored me into who I am now. Like, obviously, I have my own spin on how I do things, but I think a big part of it is just not being a gatekeeper, right? And I like this, and I'm sure you're the same. Like going, and I see this, you want to talk to 100 people. And going through my head was, okay, how many do I know? And I'm like, I got at least 50, right? Like, let's walk Ben around and make sure we can talk to 100 people. But don't be a gatekeeper. Be like a Mike Miller. You know what I mean? Like be like a Tom Heckbert. Just open doors for people. And what's more important to me, don't open that door and be like, all right, what's Ben going to do for me?
Yeah,
Right? Like,
exactly, yeah.
don't focus on that. I've never asked you for anything, and spoiler alert, I'm not going to. Now, on the same token, it's okay to be like, hey man, can we do this together? That's totally fine. If it benefits, that's great. You need to make money. I need to make money, but it's not the number one thing on my list.
That's good.
Right? I have a team here as GM that I want to see everybody be successful. I want them to have rewarding careers, but number one, I want them to be happy.
Right.
And it takes time to figure that out. I can't say when I initially came here that number one priority for me was my happiness and everybody around me's happiness, because you get in that rut of like, got to make money, I got to pay my bills, I got to do this, I got to do that.
And that comes down from the top. Like, so because of the leadership here at Eden Energy, that's what enabled you to make that transition.
100%.
And so that's what creates the culture. And so anybody who is running a business or is a leader in the industry is that you now have a responsibility, not just like, hey, it'd be nice if you did X, Y, or Z. It's like, no, you have a responsibility that like the industry is, if you have a position of power and you think the industry's screwed, it is your fault. Like,
right.
Rather, it's not, you're not entirely to blame, but the reason that it's not getting better is because you're not actually taking the initiative to commit to making it better.
Yeah, and don't wrongly assume you can't evolve, right? And in the same token, we can't wrongly assume that people don't evolve. And that's my comment before of like, just because you've had a negative interaction with someone, because I have, like I've been in this industry a long time. I've had a lot of negative interactions. I was probably putting it wrong. I've had millions of great interactions just to quantify that. Yeah. And one of the things that I do is I look at what did I do that may have resulted in that negative interaction. And that doesn't mean that I'm going like I'm a bad person. But it could be the way I approached it, right? It could have, in fact, been that I had a negative interaction with Ben because he had a family member pass away the day before, right? And so now I'm going to judge Ben for the rest of my interactions with him, and I'm going to be, I'm not a jerk to people, but, I'm going to be standoffish to Ben because I had a negative experience with him.
Or never give him a chance.
Or never give him a chance. Like, really, I think that the number one thing that we have to do, and I consciously do this, is just take a step back and treat everybody like their family. Right? Like,
and
I fight with my sisters. I fight with my brother.
All the time.
Right?
Yeah.
Do I write them off? No. And sometimes you'll sit there and be having lunch or breakfast, wherever, like, fuck's sake, sorry for the profanity, right? But, you still love them. And in our industry, I find that if you can be forgiving of people, like people have been forgiving of me, like there's a lot of people that didn't need to forgive me. Like, listen, Ridler's a good guy. He's a little salty. We just got to work around some of the saltiness. True stories, guys, right? Yeah. And the people that were willing to do that, that's my opportunity to go, I see what you did there. And now my responsibility is do it and then some.
Right. And that fundamental, like that person-to-person shift where in your daily interactions, you are seeing people as just a fellow human being who's flawed, who's had bad days. That's the necessity to shift the industry on the large scale.
Yeah.
Is that it needs to happen in every single interaction, so that then that's what changes the value sets. That's what changes the mindsets, so that then we all realize that we're in this together and that we're all just like flawed people who are just really want to be accepted, want to have something that they're proud of, and that have bad days.
I think the best thing you can do is find somebody that's willing to invest in you. And I've only figured that out in the last few years, because now that I'm in a management role, I look at my team around me, and obviously I have a wonderful team, but every personality is different. Yep. And what's fun for me is I have people on my team that are just like me, and that's good and bad. I'm just being honest, right? Like, I have good characteristics, I have bad characteristics. We all do, right? We manage and we control them. And having somebody who's willing to invest in you, and I come back to Grant, right? Like, me being the guy that I was very technically sound. I was a terrible communicator. Think about that one for a second. Like, my phone would ring on my desk and I'd be horrified. I'm like, do I have to answer? Hello? Right? Like, it was not good. I was not good with that aspect of it. But the fact that Grant looked past that and was like, I see a guy that I'm willing to invest in. And occasionally be like, you have to, like invest in people. Sometimes that's hard conversations. Sometimes it's good conversations, but don't throw people away. Yeah. Because I will say that, all personalities bring value. If you have 3 Bens or 3 Mikes or 3 of you, like, that's not good. You want us. Yeah. You want those individual personalities. It's that diversity, right? And the companies that are going to succeed are the ones that invest in people. And as we talk about like policy and politics and the industry in general, what attracts me and what gets me engaged is, again, the better HVAC conversation of it's not about us,
Yeah.
right? It's what do we do that's going to make the industry better? And we just need to remember it's not about us, which means that when somebody else joins with a new idea, it's like, oh no, hold on now. We've been around for 8 months. Like we've got our own indoctrinated policies. You can't add anything.
Or sometimes people say, oh, we tried that in the 90s, it didn't work. We don't care.
Who tried it, right? What was the process? Who was involved? Right? Did you have people like us? Did you have a policymaker? Did you have an engineer? Did you have an HVAC tech? Like, to me, if you're going to do anything, you need to have every single spoke represented. And I really think because of social media, as we talk about this, because it's like, you want to have all the people there and you want to make sure they don't have an agenda. And honestly, with social media, it's so easy to sniff that out. Right? If you went, I got 10 people, I'm going to put a policy together, go and see what they're doing when they're not in the room with you, right? Like, go on social media, see what they're doing. Go see what they're doing on YouTube. You know, it's kind of like the Joe Rogan effect. Like, Joe Rogan is a polarizing guy. I don't agree with everything he says, but at the end of the day, it's like, I can see what he's about. You know, and some things I agree with, some things I disagree with. I can figure out whether I'd like to meet the guy or not. I would. I think he'd be an intriguing guy. Like,
and he's here tonight.
But it's no longer one of those, we just met Ben. Ben says he's super qualified. How do we know he's qualified? But in the same token, don't dismiss the people that may not have a piece of paper that says they're qualified.
Oh God, yeah.
Right? And that's one of the biggest things of like, well, you don't have a PhD, so you can't sit at the table.
And time. This is where one of the problems with what technology has done to our society is that everything needs to happen so instantaneously.
Yeah.
But when you look at a lot of other cultures around the world, relationships take time.
Yeah.
And so, like, good example is I've interacted with Japanese businessmen, and it's like, until you do multiple social meetings of just being able to start feeling each other out, if you even start talking about business, it's a faux pas, and you will start losing your credibility with them. For sure. Because there is they want to understand the character that's beneath the business deal that they're going to create. And so our society, like, there is so much of this, I guess, fixation on surface level value. And what we, as a part of that, saying, hey, we need to be collaborative, like, to be able to make better policies, everybody needs to be at the table. That's then going to take time. Is that we're going to have to go through the process of being like, okay, so you have something, maybe you're not as articulate. We need to be able to get the right value out of you. We need to figure out who can help you with articulating, you know, what you need to contribute. And that might take a little bit longer. And this is where, like, associations like BPI and ASHRAE, as they're trying to do their standards and as they're trying to, you know, complete a task on a committee or task force, like, they take time, because that type of representation is not something that happens instantaneously. You can, sure, there's ways that you can make it go a little bit faster, but there's a processing limit to how we can deal with that, and we have to spend time to reflect.
Time's an interesting thing. Like, one of those things where, do you actually understand what time means? And the example, the example I like to use is, like, as the younger generation, you know, I know that when I was in the trades and, you know, I started to evolve through my career, I was like, I know what I'm doing. And you sort of start to dismiss the older generation and how they do things. The most important thing we need to do is recognize that the old school is going to be the term we use. The old school way of doing things is so important. The people that have been doing this a long time, like Jamie Johnson, you'll have to meet him at some point. If it's at CMPX, I'll introduce you. He's been doing this for so long, and I call him Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like, he knows so much, right? And you need to have those people. But in the same token, you need the younger guys, right? You need the Aarons, you need the Terrences, you need these other guys that can sort of bring different insights. We have this misconception of time, and we think things are taking too long. So one of the examples I always like to use is I remind people that the Egyptian pyramids are closer in time to us than they are to Cleopatra, right? And people have to think about that, and not by a little bit, right? In the grand scheme of things, it's a small blip in time between the pyramids and us. It's a huge blip in time between the pyramids and the Sphinx and Cleopatra. And so when we look at things are taking too long, it's subjective. In the same token, there's that other side of me that's like, we can't keep repeating the same things over and over again. And how do we stop? Well, yeah, it's the same thing. You know, like, we're trying to make changes to stop climate change. But again, are we doing that for great sound bites? Are we doing that for votes? Are we doing that because we're looking at Canadians Americans, North Americans, like, how are we approaching that and who's making decisions? And I don't see that. But that doesn't mean it's not happening. I take the position of just because I'm not at the table doesn't mean I should judge the table.
Yeah.
But I think as a policymaker, you would have more respect if you were more transparent in that.
So given all the, so, we talked about changing in culture, right? And then we talked about like changing in policies, changes in technology. You just mentioned climate change. So given all these changes, it just seems like a really interesting time in the industry. Like, so would you say from your vantage point, having been here for some time and very likely going to be here for a long time, would you say you're optimistic about the future?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really optimistic about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that I don't feel there's a good old boys club.
Yeah.
I would have at one point, but I think it's a maturity thing, right? As you mature, you realize, nah, the only clubs and the only tribes are the ones we make, right? And at the end of the day, if you take the attitude of like, no, this is my pump. I'm not sharing this pump with you. I'm not sharing my knowledge with you, right? You can replace pump with association, with government entity. It's like coming down on the gas utilities. Like, the gas utilities are evil. Why are they evil? Why can that not be part of the change? Why can't the gas utilities in North America adopt district heating? Spoiler alert, they are.
Right.
Why can't the gas utilities help to put rebate programs together for like phase change thermal storage? Right? Like, there's this whole tribalism of like, well, if you're the utility, I hate you. In the same token, they can take the approach, well, the heat pump guy is a threat to me. We need to squeeze the heat pump guy out. Knock it off.
And I think just as long as everybody starts realizing that, most people do just want to have like a unified approach to the brotherhood, that type of acceptance, that community. It's that there's just the larger kind of construct of our society ends up creating this fracturing, this fragmentation, this segmentation that for many different purposes, some of them for good intentions, some of them maybe not so good. But I think just helping people realize that it's just like, everybody really is just trying to do their best. And everybody is trying to make a positive difference, like in the majority, almost all cases. Some of them are just, they have access to different information, access to different resources. But unfortunately, in our attention economy, where a lot of attention has to be monetized, then you start getting these biased kind of, I guess, interpretations of what we as a humanity care about.
Yeah.
Because like deep down, we all do want that kind of collective good and collective progress, instead of it being something where only a few people are benefiting. But it's hard to see that when there is such a filtering and all these algorithms that end up governing what it is that we hear. Like, even like starting from like or Gen Alpha, like algorithms are governing their reality from day one.
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, we just have to recognize what drives people. At the end of the day, people want to have a good, stable life. And one of the things that we just need to be aware of is that confirmation bias, right? And you sort of talk about this. One of the things we have to be so careful about is don't judge people on their past, right? Like, there's a lot of people who have done dumb things in the past, and people probably have done criminal things in their past. Like, don't judge people on the past. But the other thing that I've noticed is there's been cases, I wish I could think of a good example off the top of my head, but I can't. There was a case, and I can think of many just in general, where I'd watch something on the news and be like, this is ridiculous. Like, we need to get on this. This is absolutely ridiculous. And then when it's all said and done, it's BS. Right? And so what it is that herd mentality of just because somebody's talking about it on TV or somebody's got a podcast and they're talking about it, is that we just assume they're right. It's the same thing with me. Like, if I'm talking about something, I say this during training all the time, don't assume that I'm the smartest person in this room because I'm standing here with the microphone. Challenge the status quo and really don't be a lemming. Like, just because somebody is on the news or has a podcast and says, this is a blue circulator, but it's green. No, it's blue. Okay, it's blue. Right? Like, it seems stupid, but the amount of decisions that we make that are based off of somebody saying it's a fact, and then it's not.
But the problem is, there's two problems there. One is that so many people are burned out. And so going through the process of trying to challenge, like, that cognitive dissonance, so a lot of people are just like, okay, this is not worth my energy. I can't fight this, or I'm not going to challenge it because there's not enough of it's not worth my time. I can't do this right now. That's one side. And the second thing is the actual social acceptance problem. is that to be a part of your local tribe or to be a part of a group of friends, you need to conform to a certain value system. And so, though so many people are desperate for belonging, we all are.
Yeah.
And if you haven't been provided the, let's say, background in your life, the mentorship, the positive communities that allows you to see that it's like, hey, you can actually challenge, you can be in a part of the community, you can challenge somebody, and you're not going to be expelled from the community. You will still have a position. You won't lose that thing that humanity needs the most, which is belonging and acceptance.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's important to realize is it's okay to not like everybody. One of the first things that happened with me, and again, it's Grant. Like when Grant had told me when I started, like, just so you know, not everybody's gonna like you. I was like, what do you mean not everybody? Like, I want everybody to like me. He's like, I'm just telling you right now, there are going to be people that do not like you just because they do not like you. And it's not your job to change their mind. But in the same token, that doesn't mean you write them off, right? If somebody doesn't like me, that doesn't mean I can't be courteous. I can't make an effort.
You can't treat them with grace or any of that.
100%. Like that's a tough thing for I don't know about women, but for me as a man, that's tough for me to do. Absolutely. You know, people slight you and you just take everything personal. And part of that is, again, it's the alpha male thing of like, don't confuse the kind facade. Like the hamster on the wheel is going backwards right now, and I'm just trying not to murder anybody in the rim, right? But that's part of it is that you have to choose to set that tone. You have to choose to have that positive tone. And I think it's important.
And it does, I think we need to acknowledge, though, that it does take a lot of effort to be able to, for you to, not combat, but for you to, I guess, dance with that 1,000-pound gorilla in your brain, is that it does take a lot of conscious effort to be like, it's better for me and for everyone else around me that if I were to have this more balanced approach, that if I were to consider all these different perspectives, then there will be better outcomes.
Self-awareness.
But it took you time and effort to be able to get there. And so if anybody else is going to go on that path, it's not just like, it's not a switch that you can flip. Like you had said, as a man, it's a little bit more difficult to deal with that. And I 100% agree, because like women spend a lot more time analyzing all those social contracts and understanding the value of social cohesion. And it's a little bit more of a construct of patriarchy that's just like kind of like, oh, I don't have to worry about that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
my woman will take care of that for me. And so I just want to acknowledge that it's a lot of work. And so if anybody, as people would be going through that transition, it can be painful. And that's also why mentorship and finding the right supportive community that has the values of what you want to move towards is so important.
But the key thing to that is you have to do it for you.
Yeah.
Right? Like I don't behave a certain way because you're here. And you guys, you know this because you see me in so many different facets that I'm me. You're either going to like it or you're not going to like it. Like I like to make jokes. I like to fool around. I may say dumb things occasionally or all the time, but I try to make it be fun. I'm doing it for me. I don't have any kind of agenda. My agenda is I want to live a positive and productive life, knowing that I'm not an overly positive guy all the time, but I'm willing to, let that thought process go through my head once before it comes out of my mouth. Yeah. Because again, people write off people that have I'm going to say an aggressive approach to things. People asking things in a challenging way of like, Ben, that's bullshit. I don't agree with you, right? There's a better way to say it. So what I'm doing is I'm going through the process in my head of, okay, how do I communicate this to Ben that's respectful to Ben? And the fun part is that the more that you do it, the better you get at it. It doesn't make me any less of a person. I just don't hide it. Like I can pretend, like Ben has only met me. I could pretend, like we only met in the last year or so. Yeah. I could pretend, I could pretend like, no, I've always been this way. I've just always been a cheery, fun guy who tries to go out and help everybody. No, there's a lot of people that kick me in the shins and close doors on me. Like, screw this kid. Like, who does he think he is coming in here? And I'd be like, hold my beer. You're not willing to put the work in.
I can see it behind his eyes, man.
Right? But you can't have that attitude. The attitude needs to be like, this is the way that you are. I'm not going to try and change you, but I'd like to invite you to come along.
So earlier, Michael, you said that what most people want is a stable life. Right?
Yeah.
Like a stable, high quality of life. And in Canada, like, we call it like middle class prosperity now, right? We have a minister now for middle class prosperity. And so getting to middle class prosperity is an aspiration for a lot of people. And so that's the kind of thing that what you said is evoking. What I'm wondering is, in my head, a lot of like manufacturing jobs and automotive jobs, they used to provide that, right?
Yeah.
So you had that stable, unionized perhaps, middle class job, living in a town that, and you could bank on that job. You could bank on a career growth and trajectory that your family will be taken care of and stuff like that in your hometown.
Yeah.
We don't have those anymore now, not as much as we used to. For a lot of people, perhaps like me included, I see HVAC as being something, the sector being as something that can naturally provide that, because there is a certain value. And I remember going to on a ride along with a contractor, a friend of mine, and then it was like an old oil furnace, actually backup oil furnace, and I think it was like probably 35 years old even, right? And then like on there, on like the service logs on the thing, his granddad's name was on there.
Yeah.
His dad's name was there. So 3 generations have had like middle class prosperity from something like this. And as a lot of young people in this country are looking to find meaning and find like a job that matters to them, where they feel like they belong, adds value to them, and gives them like access to material, stable middle class jobs. Do you see HVAC being a natural place for young people like that?
I think so, but I think that part of the problem is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'm going to use a non-HVAC example for that, right? So for me, I have a really, really big issue with our supply chain when it comes to pharmacy and groceries. I'm going to leave it there. I don't want to, right? And I think that if you went out and if you surveyed 100 Canadians and said, hey, are you happy with the way our supply chain is right now on those two fronts? And everybody needs to eat and everybody needs drugs. And so it's only within the last month that I was like, wait a minute, how do I make a change here? I know full well that my change is not going to be the difference between these companies changing or not, but we have this assumption that we just have to continue to go down this road. So I made the choice of going from a big chain drugstore to a little drugstore, and I found it with the help of my community online. That'll shock you. I went online, was like, I'm tired of feeding the machine. I believe in community. How can I do this? I'm now paying less money. I walked into the pharmacy. I was like, I need a script filled. He's like, no problem. He handed me my drugs. I'm like, well, I'm not coming back. Like, you don't need 3 days? He's like, no. And the woman in the back, this sounds like an infomercial. The woman in the back was like, oh, you didn't get your script filled? We're going to just come in. We'll get you a couple of pills to keep you going. I'm like, I'm paying less money. I have a local experience. So to your point, like, I understand that the challenge of manufacturing and good paying jobs, part of it is our choice, right? Like, if Canadians got off their asses, and I hope they do, if they got off their asses and said, you know what, I can keep complaining on the internet, which everybody does, me included. I can complain on the internet about I don't like drug prices, or I can make a change. If all Canadians said, I am not buying my drugs from this chain for the entire month of April, have you seen this boycott yet? Yeah, okay. They're going to notice. They don't notice me. They don't notice the 3 of us. But if they all stopped, instead, what we like to do is we like to picket. Like here in Guelph, there was a picket where they blocked the highway. People got out and blocked the highway as a boycott over a political issue. And I'm going like, what is wrong with you? This is not doing anything. This is literally making you enemies. It's the same thing when people say, I don't agree with this company, let's go picket them. What is that going to solve? Do you think the people in that building have anything to do with this?
And it mattered a lot more maybe 100 years ago, where every business was in person. And it was like just a local community that went in and sat out of that building. And so picketing in front of that building, it absolutely did make sense, because everything about that business got disrupted.
The owner was in the building looking at you in the parking lot.
That's not the case anymore.
That's not the case now. The owner is quite literally shareholders. Right? And so if you look at the community, whether it's HVAC, whether it's my groceries, whether it's drugs, right? The reality is that we collectively make a choice to provide for our community. So the irony is I switched my drug supplier. That sounds terrible. I switched my drug supplier. And
you made it in a parking lot?
I mean, I get into a parking lot before I go into the store. But the reality is that you walk in and you see this guy. He's a really nice, friendly dude. You see the 2 people that work for him. You realize, like, holy crap, I'm actually giving back to my community. So now for me, I'm looking at everything that I'm doing, and I'm looking at who can I support in my community, because to your point, I'm now empowering you if you have a drugstore. I'm empowering you if you have a bakery, right? We don't want to get too extreme. Like people are like, oh, chains are bad. Chains are not bad. It's community. Like if somebody wants to open, you brought bread today, like Cobb's bread. We got to eat that stuff, by the way. Like that Cobb's bread is run by a local family, right? Like support your community. Give jobs to your community.
My wife used to work there actually.
Yeah.
When we lived here close. Yeah.
And that's one thing. Trying to discover. Sorry,
Yeah, I feel like we should get
we
food.
should get.
So am I. This is Cody, by the way.
Yeah. Ever since you said Japan earlier, I got ramen. Right?
Oh, dude, let's do ramen. Yeah, let's go to Kenzo. Let's get some ramen.
Crafty?
And,
Crafty ramen downtown?
Crafty. We're gonna take you to a good. Oh,
Okay.
you gotta edit that out.
Ramen fight.
Yeah. Let's go to Kenzo.